Chapter 8, Sports Sensor. The sports sensor is actually a combination of different products. For one, it is the nutrition sensor, where we test more than 50 genes to find out which food constituents are healthy and which are not healthy for you. Also things about detoxification and so on. So all things that influence the healthiness of your body and the performance during athletic sport. Then also the weight sensor. So you can also lose weight with this program. However, it's not exactly like the weight sensor, but you will find out how to lose weight while still having enough energy to have some performance, which is important when you lose weight just before a competition to reach a certain weight class, for example. And then the food list, which is included in both, where we have more than 1,000 food items which are classed based or rated based on your genes and your chosen sport to find out which types of food are better or worse for you. So the sports sensor is here in the list of in the product display, and it contains all of these, but specifically for elite athletes. Now, this sensor has 5 specific factors that are important for optimal performance. One is the structure of muscle cells, and this is very heavily regulated by genetics. So we can test genes, find out what kind of muscle cells the body produces, also what kind of nutrients these muscle cells need for optimal performance. Second part is optimal nutrition. So what nutrients does my body need, and which nutrients should I avoid, what food should I eat. The next question is optimal micronutrients. Athletes, especially elite athletes, produce a lot of free radicals, which are toxic molecules that cause a chain reaction of destruction in tissues. And so certain micronutrients, certain vitamins help with protecting from these free radicals, and they are required in higher amounts. So the optimal micronutrient dosage based on genetics and on the sport chosen can be adapted. The next factor number 4, is optimal calorie distribution. Basically, some muscle cells prefer to use sugar, some muscle fibers prefer to use fat as an energy source. So depending on what sport you want to do and how your muscle cells or muscle fibers are structured, you should eat more fat or more carbohydrates to give your fibers the energy or the fuel they need. And the 5th factor is optimal body weight. Obviously, if you have to carry 5 kilos extra along a marathon run, that's wasted energy. And also some types of sports need to reduce their body weight to reach a certain weight class, and so the optimal body weight is also an important factor. And this program will help an athlete or an aspiring athlete to optimize all of these 5 categories according to the individual predispositions, personally chosen sport, and personal genes. So let's talk about the first factor, the structure of the muscle cells. There is probably the most important gene is the alpha-actinin 3 gene. This gene is only expressed in white muscle cells. These are the strong muscle cells. And as I've explained in the genetic training video, every person, with some exceptions, has 2 genes of every gene type. So this gene exists in 2 different forms. One is for endurance and one is for power. So this is the one you want for marathon running, this is the one you want for weightlifting. So it's possible, since I have 2 genes, that both of them are for endurance, both of them are for power, or one of them is for endurance, the other one is for power. These are the 3 options. This is what you see here. 2 endurance genes, 1 endurance, 1 power gene, and 2 power genes. Now, we know from studies that these gene combinations are best for power-oriented sports, so let's call them power genes. and they control that you produce more white muscle fibers. They are whitish in appearance, and they're also called fast twitch muscle fibers. You can imagine them as very big and voluminous, and they can produce very strong forces, and they are very quick. That's why they're fast twitch muscle fibers, so it's perfect for sprinting, weightlifting, and strong, short impulses of power. However, they are very poorly aerated by the blood supply. That's why they're white and not red. So oxygen is very slow to go into these muscle fibers, and nutrients are also slowly supplied to these muscle fibers. So they're good for strong and short impulses, but they tire very quickly. They are good. That's the stuff you would want for sprinting. Then there are the red, the slow twitch muscle fibers. They are reddish in appearance due to a very strong blood supply. They're long and thin, lots of blood vessels. The blood supplies them with oxygen and nutrients, much more than it does in white muscle cells. So while they work, they get more oxygen and they can be kept going. So this is the stuff that you would want for marathon running, because they tire very slowly, but they are not very good for sprinting where you need fast contractions and strong contractions. So they're bad for sprinting. Now, scientists have found the following, which is very interesting. As I said, 2 endurance genes is bad for sprinting. And the control group, which is the general population, we have around 14% of this gene combination in the general population in Europe. So 14% would have the wrong genes for sprinting. Now, if you look at sprinting athletes, especially the ones in the elite level, the ones that take part in world championships or Olympics, so the ones that really got to the top of the game, the ones that would need sprinting genes and can't use the endurance genes, only 3% still have this gene combination. So what does this mean? Generally, when people say, I want to become a sprinter, 14% of them are going to have the wrong genes for this. And the ones that actually do make it until the end, only 3% are there with the wrong genes. So the ones with the wrong genes are quite strongly filtered out. It still means you can have the wrong genes for this type of sport. That's absolutely possible. But you have a 5 times lower chance of reaching the elite level in sprinting with the wrong genes for this sport type. So genes really do play a very strong effect in this respect. So having 2 endurance genes means you have lots of red, the slow twitch muscle fibers, and having 1 or 2 of the power genes, you have more white muscle fibers, the fast twitch ones. Now, what's interesting, red muscle fibers like to burn fat and carbohydrates, so sugar and fat as an energy source. And white muscle fibers do not, they only burn carbohydrates. So depending on what sort of muscle fibers you have, the muscle fibers will prefer different kind of food or fuel. The endurance ones need fat, while the other ones only need carbs. And fat is actually a quite interesting type of fuel, because 1 gram of fat contains 9 calories, while 1 gram of carbohydrate contains 4 calories, so half as much energy. So fat is actually a good energy source, but only the red muscle fibers use them. So the recommendations you can give a person based on their alpha-actinin 3 gene is, if you have 2 endurance genes, this person is a genetic endurance talent based on this gene, and this person should eat a balance between fat and carbohydrates. If you have 1 power gene, you have power talent, you should eat carbohydrates, and 2 power genes the same, eat carbohydrates. And this is what it looks like in the report. You see around 24% have endurance, 44% power, and 31% power. So depending on what your gene says, your arrow is going to be in one of these positions. So this person is a strong power talent. Then there's another gene, the ACE gene, angiotensin converting enzyme gene. again, there is an endurance and a power version. And you can have 2 endurance, 2 power, 1 endurance and 1 power. And from scientific studies, we know that these combinations are endurance and these are for power. And there was a very interesting study. They took elite swimmers and they put them in 2 groups, the ones that are better at long distances and the ones that are better at short distances. And obviously the ones at long distance would, in theory, you would guess, want the endurance genes, and the ones at short distance want the power genes, so stronger, faster, but tire quickly. And they then did a genetic test and they found 93% of the long distance swimmers had the long distance genes, the endurance genes. 7% had the wrong genes for this type. So again, there were some people which had the wrong genes for this. That's absolutely possible. However, the majority had the right genes for this. They then tested the short distance swimmers and they found that 47% instead of 7 have the power genes, the ones that are better at short distances, and 53% had the endurance genes. So really there's a very big difference in how common these genes are in the elite group of these types of sports. So what this tells us is if you have the right genes, you have a better chance in your discipline, long distance or short distance. You still have a possibility to compete in other levels, of course, but you will have an advantage if you go for the distance or the type of sport that your genes are predisposed to. And again here, this is how it looks in the report. This is power, endurance, endurance, and this is how common these are. And in the end, combining the result of both genes, it can be that both say you're power-oriented, both say you're endurance, or anywhere in between, and then you see an arrow here where you're situated. So this is kind of interesting information. For some athletes that already know I'm a football player, they won't have much benefit from this. Others that still have the option, should they go long distance, short distance, they can modify their training or their choice based on their genes. But what is also interesting is we know which muscle fibers the body produces, and we can give the body different types of fuel, different types of calories to fuel the muscle cells. So this is the first structure. Here we test 2 genes. Optimal nutrition. This is basically the whole nutrition sensor, but it's adapted to athletes. The basic principle is simple to understand. Let's take 3 people with genetic diseases. One of them is lactose intolerant due to a genetic variation. One of them is gluten intolerant, celiac disease, so reacts badly to the protein in wheat. And the other one has an iron overload disorder, so due to genes or genetic variations absorbs too much iron from food. Now, if you tell these people the general rules of a healthy diet, one of the rules is dairy products are a good source of calcium, so they're healthy, which is definitely not true for a person that is lactose intolerant. If they eat dairy products with lactose, they're gonna feel very unwell. It's not a problem for gluten intolerant or iron overload disorder patients because they don't react badly to lactose, and they do indeed benefit from the high calcium in the dairy products. If you then say wheat or whole grain bread, for example, is good for the digestion, it has a lot of fiber, then that is absolutely true for the lactose intolerant person. A gluten intolerant person will feel very unwell if he eats gluten containing wheat products, and it's okay for the iron overload disorder person. And red meat, especially for people with iron deficiency, red meat is a good source of iron. Then that is true for lactose and gluten intolerant people, but the person that already absorbs too much iron should really avoid iron containing red meat. So what you see from this, these are just 6 genes that are involved in this, and these 6 genes give very different nutritional advice to people based on genetics. So really having one guidance of what type of food is good for you and what is bad for you is not possible for everyone with the same rules. you need to do a genetic test to find out what your genetic predispositions are, and this is really where your individuality lies, and this is where you can read what type of food is good for you and which is not. And this is the basic principle. So we really look at diseases, disease risks and metabolic abnormalities, and we optimize the body's response to food, and we can choose what kind of food is good for you and increases performance. Now, free radicals or oxidative stress is a big topic for elite athletes. The reason why athletes begin breathing faster when they do strenuous sport is because they need to convert more energy, and converting energy requires oxygen. Now, oxygen has the tendency to be converted to free radicals, and about 5% of the oxygen that we breathe in ends up in a free radical called superoxide. And here you see that's the outside of a cell, that's where it is produced. Then there's the cytoplasm, the inside of the cell, and then there are these kind of powerhouses in the cells called mitochondria. They actually produce most of the superoxide. This is where most of the oxygen is converted. Now, nature has given us a good defense against this because it's a very toxic molecule. The SOD3 gene produces the SOD3 enzyme that can convert superoxide to hydrogen peroxide. Also, hydrogen peroxide is a free radical, but this is then neutralized by other ways. So it's really this conversion that's important, so that this free radical can be neutralized. Inside the cytoplasm, it's a different gene, the SOD1 gene, that carries out this function, and in mitochondria, it's the SOD2 gene. So these are three important defensive mechanisms against free radicals in all people, and especially important in athletes that produce 5 times more free radicals. Now, the problem is that some people have a genetic variation in this gene which abolishes their protection from free radicals in mitochondria. And this is really where most of the superoxide is produced. So the superoxide begins to damage the mitochondria, the cells, and the tissues. This is the gene, and this is actually a part of the scientific part of the report. You will see the 3 different genotypes, so the different gene combinations. We are looking at genetic variations within genes. So if you look at this gene and compare 5 different people, the whole gene is going to be identical. There's only one or 2 small variations that can vary between these. And this is the genetic variation that is commonly found, and that inhibits the function of this gene. So by just looking at one genetic letter where this variation lies, we can tell if this gene works or not. So having a C and a C on both genes, and that's 20% of the European population, you have good protection against oxidative stress. If you have a T, that means the gene is broken. 53% you have limited protection, and in 27% you have 2 Ts, so 2 broken genes, so to say, you have limited protection. And this here is the science behind it, in case you're interested and you want to read up behind it. So this gene is quite commonly disrupted in some people, and they have a weak protection against oxidative stress. This causes damage and faster aging of tissues. Obviously, that's bad for athletic performance. So what can you do? If you know that this gene is defective and you are an athlete, even if you're not, you can find other ways to neutralize these free radicals. And there are free radical inhibitors called antioxidants. And there are certain vitamins like vitamin C, vitamin E, alpha-lipoic acid, and some other substances that can grab free radicals and neutralize them. So in a way, by using these vitamins, you can restore the function that your body has lost due to this genetic variation. And this can then protect the mitochondria and the tissues. So now we know that certain micronutrients are going to be required in higher dosages and some substances might be bad for you, like detoxification. And now the question is, how can you cover these recommendations or these requirements that your body has? And for example, antioxidants can be found in fruit and in colored vegetables, especially colored vegetables. And eating more of these will increase the amount of antioxidants that you have in your diet. Then some genetic variations might require you to eat more omega-3 fatty acids. For example, tendency for high cholesterol. If a genetic variation is present, this might actually be counterproductive. So this is what we're looking at as well. Then omega-3 makes your immune system less aggressive. So some genetic types have the tendency to have the immune system attack the cartilage of joints, and by increasing omega-3 you can reduce this effect, so protect the joints. For some people, they need more calcium due to higher risk of osteoporosis or detoxification. Some people absorb too much iron, so they should eat less iron, which means red meat and alcohol should be reduced. And some people have bad detoxification, so toxins that reach the body are inefficient in being removed. So for one, you should avoid foods that are known to contain these toxins, because a poisoned body is not going to perform as well as a healthy body. And this is what it looks like in the report. So you get a list of more than 1,000 food types, and each of them is based on the nutrients or the components it is composed of. So selenium, different vitamins, also bad substances like arachidonic acid are all considered, and then in the end, based on your genetics, this list will say this is good for you or this is bad for you. Having these red smileys means it's bad for you, green ones is good for you. And there are some neutral ones, so it's really from very good to very bad. You get a list of what you should eat to keep your body supplied with the nutrients it needs and to make sure that you get optimal performance. Now the next factor kind of ties into the optimal nutrition. Here we tested 2 genes for the structure of muscle cells. Here we tested more than 50 genes for the optimal nutrition. And from the same genes we know which micronutrients you require in what dosage. And let's look at an example. There is a gene called GPX1, and this gene produces an enzyme, a kind of machine, that has a certain role. But this enzyme is not effective in the way it is produced. It first needs the micronutrient selenium. And selenium is integrated, and then the machine becomes active, the enzyme becomes active, recognizes free radicals and neutralizes them. So it protects us like the SOD2 gene from these toxic free radicals. Now, if a person has selenium deficiency, so too little selenium available, not many of these enzymes are activated. So you have too low activity of this enzyme and low protection from oxidative stress. Increasing the amount of selenium to the normal amounts will then increase the amount, for example, to 70% activity, and that ensures that you have adequate protection. Now, there's a genetic variation that changes the instructions of how to build this enzyme. It's still built, it has a small modification, it's still activated by selenium, and it can still bind free radicals, however, not as well, for example, 50% less. So this enzyme still works, but less effectively. And even with normal selenium amounts, this enzyme will have reduced activity as if you were selenium deficient. And science has found out that if you increase the amount of selenium, so more than the normal recommended daily allowance, then you can increase the activity and restore it by adding more selenium that would be normal. And this is the gene. Again, the genetic variation 2Cs means good protection, so a majority, 67%, are well protected, normal amounts of selenium required. CT is 26%, limited protection, and TT is 7%, also limited protection. So, we can now adapt the dosage based on genetics. If the gene works normally, the normal amount of selenium is sufficient and the cells are protected. If you have a genetic variation, you need significantly more selenium to reach the same result, so a higher dose of selenium is required. And this actually is an interesting question. Some people say, why not test blood for the amount of selenium that is contained? If you did that, you would find a certain amount of selenium reaching the blood, and you would say you try to adapt everyone to the same level, but in reality some of them would require a much higher level. So really testing blood is not a good way of finding out the real requirement of this micronutrient. This is only possible by genetics. Then there's another example. Coenzyme Q10 is a very expensive micronutrient. It's taken as a nutritional supplement, and it itself has no function, no effect. It first needs to be modified by a gene that produces an enzyme, small scissors, so to say, that converts coenzyme Q10 to ubiquinol. And this is a very strong antioxidant enzyme. And antioxidants, as I said, are very important for elite athletes. Now, ubiquinol can then find free radicals and neutralize them. However, some people, this is the NQ01 gene, have a genetic variation that disrupts its function. So 66% have it functional, 30% have a slower, one of them is defective, and 4% have a completely defective enzyme. So what you find is coenzyme Q10 is absorbed into the body, it's not activated, and free radicals are not neutralized. So what you can then do is either take ubiquinol in its active form rather than coenzyme Q10, because it just doesn't work, or use other free radical inhibitors that neutralize them. So really there is a percentage of the population that take coenzyme Q10 to be protected against free radicals, but they have absolutely no protection. They even lack this protection from their own body, and they would benefit from other antioxidants. And again, measuring coenzyme Q10 amount is not going to help you identify this. You really need to test the genetics to find this. So, depending on whether the enzyme, the gene is functional and produces an enzyme, you can use ubiquinol, coenzyme Q10 as an antioxidant to protect your cells. If it's effective, coenzyme Q10 is not going to function, you need other substances to protect yourself. And in order to be able to follow these complex recommendations, this was only a very short overview. In reality, as I said, we're testing more than 50 genes. We're dosing more than 20 micronutrients based on your genetics, more of this, less of this, really according to your genes. There are more than 700 trillion different recipe options based on so many genes. This is what we have produced based on this. And it works like this. You have a measuring spoon, and this product is made of lots of small pellets, we call them microtransporters. And each one of them, we have more than 20, each one of them contains one vitamin, like vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin A, alpha lipoic acid, and so on. And we can mix different amounts of these micronutrients together into this bottle, and thereby we can create a unique recipe based on your genetics. As I said, this is also available for normal people that don't do athletic sports, but for athletes it's specifically modified to make sure that we have more antioxidants there to neutralize the increased amount of oxidative stress. And this is where you find it in the product overview. And this is the chapter of optimal micronutrients. Now the next question is the optimal calorie distribution. From food, we can get calories from three main sources. That's proteins, amino acids, sugars or carbohydrates, and fats. That's the three main energy sources, the macronutrients. For athletic performance, two of them are very important. One of them is sugar, carbohydrates, and the other one is fat. Now, depending on what kind of sport you want to do, the requirement is very different. For example, sprinters, as I said, need white muscle fibers. And white muscle fibers have the tendency to use sugar only. So they like to use glycogen. Glycogen is a sugar stored in the muscles to be available immediately. They use it up, they run out of oxygen, they run out of sugars, and then they tire very quickly. But they have really created strong forces and fast movements. So they like sugar. The endurance are the red muscle fibers. Marathon runners like to use sugar as well. However, also fat as an energy source. And as I said, fat is a good energy source because it contains twice as much energy per gram than sugar. So it's really something you would want to give your muscles because there's a lot of energy in there. And game sports like football are quite heavy on endurance, but there are always short phases of power where they need to sprint and create strong and fast forces in their muscles. They need a mixture, a little more sugar, but also some fat. So really, depending on the type of sport that you perform, we need to give your body different types of fuel. And when ordering this test, you need to state which type of sport you prefer to do. So if you're endurance sports, power sports, combat sports, game sports, there are all these different options. And by choosing this, we can make sure that we adapt your nutrition so your muscle fibers get the fuel that they like to use. And this is what the result looks like. So for carbohydrates, this person needs more carbohydrates, less fat, and very little protein. And this is the balance: 64% from carbohydrates, 22% from fat, and 14% from protein. And don't worry, you don't need to calculate with this. This is just some background information. This is optimal based on the sport chosen, but you remember, we know if this person has more white or more red muscle fibers, so we also fine-tune this by the type of muscle fibers the genetics have given this person. So we know this calorie distribution is optimal, and this is then what it looks like. In the food table, as I said, more than 1,000 types of food are listed. You will have some that are good for performance. It's basically this bar here. If it's small and green, it's optimal. That means I need fat and carbohydrates. It has both of them, then it's optimal. It's a small green bar. If it only has carbohydrates or only fat, which is not optimal for my muscle fibers, it's going to be a red bar, and it's bad for performance. So by looking at this, you find out I eat more of the green, less of the red stuff. This is going to give my muscles the right balance for my sport and my genes to supply the optimal form of energy. And the final factor is the optimal body weight. Now, as I said, for marathon runners, carrying 5 kilos extra is a waste of energy, and other athletes need to lose weight to reach a certain weight class in their combat sports, for example. And weight loss and athletic performance, that you both want to do before a competition, is really the opposite thing. So you want to lose weight, so you want to give your body as little energy as possible, and you want to have great athletic performance, so you want to give your body as much energy as possible. So it's really trying to do the same thing with different things with opposite things at the same time. And this is what we do. We use the calorie distribution that you need for optimal performance in your sport. So you need more fat and carbohydrates. This balance will be maintained. This will make sure that the food that you eat still gives your body the right fuel to give some performance. However, we still give your body less energy than you take in. So it's a calorie reduction. So by reducing your calorie by for example, 500 kilocalories per day, you're going to lose weight, and from the energy that you eat, it's still the optimal for optimal performance. So you don't lose all of your performance because you're losing weight at the same time. So it's a balance. It's not as effective as if we would do weight loss based purely on weight loss genes, but it's a good balance between weight loss and athletic performance. And there's one additional possibility, which I'm going to show you in a minute. The way you can do this calorie reduction is by using the DNA Nutri-Control portal. It's a website where you can register, and you will find the registration details, what you should enter. This is basically your genetics or the calorie distribution based on your genetics. You log in and the program will generate a random menu for you. It will choose different types of foods, put them together and make sure it's the right calorie distribution and also the right reduction for you to lose weight. And by following this, you might get tuna and you say, I don't like tuna. You grab it, throw it away. It will give you a different type of food. Or you can choose from over 15,000 different ingredients. So you can really choose what you want to eat. And the program will then tell you how much you're allowed to eat of it to make sure you reach the right balance. And by using this program, it will be very easy for you to plan your nutrition to lose weight. And the other option that we have, it's also for non-athletes. It's called NutriMe Weight Management. And it looks like this. It's a blister, we call it. Basically, it's made of two medical products. A medical product is basically something like a nutritional supplement, but it needs to scientifically prove that it works. And this is made up of two different components. One of them is like a sponge. You eat it, you take it with food, and the fats that is in your food will be absorbed and bound, and it will not be absorbed by the body, and you will excrete it. So it's as if you had not eaten this amount of fat. Up to 23% are absorbed and not absorbed by the body. And then the other component is an enzyme inhibitor. Basically, if I eat carbohydrates, most carbohydrates are like a chain of pearls, like lots of little sugars that are attached to each other. And an enzyme, small scissors, need to cut them into pieces for the body to absorb them. And these scissors, these enzymes, can be blocked by this other component, and they will not cut down the long chain carbohydrates, and they will stay in the intestine and will also be excreted. 2/3 of carbohydrates can be reduced. So if you require additional weight loss help, we can create this personally for you. It is always a mixture of the two different components, but which kind of mixture you require is really dependent on the calorie distribution you're allowed or you're meant to achieve. So based on your choice and your genetics, we will create your personalized mixture. You will have your name in here, and you will eat one for lunch and one for dinner. Take the two pills together with your meal, and it will reduce the calories that your body absorbs. So it's really weight loss help in addition to the menu portal. And these are the 5 important factors for weight management. So just to summarize, we find out your muscle cells by testing 2 different genes, what type of muscle cells or muscle fibers you produce, what sort of energy your muscle fibers require. We make sure that you eat the right nutrients that your body requires. We avoid substances that your body should not eat. This is highly personal by testing 52 genes. We find out what your optimal micronutrient requirements are. More vitamin C, less of this, more of this. And we can tell you how much of each micronutrient you should take per day to also combat the increased oxidative stress that your body is going to produce. We are going to make sure that you have the right calorie distribution so that you give the right fuel to your body based on the sports that you have chosen and the muscle fibers, more fat, more carbohydrates, whatever your body needs for high optimal performance. And we help you to reduce your body weight should you require this to reach a certain weight class. And by looking at all of these 5 factors, it allows elite athletes or aspiring athletes to optimize their nutrition, their training, and everything about the body based on their individual genetic profile. Everyone is different, there are different recommendations for everybody, and by looking at this, it helps you get the best possible nutritional and training advice and recommendations for your optimal competitive success. And that's the end of chapter 8, the sports sensor.